Good morning all and welcome to the Procurement Scrutiny Board. First item on the agenda is apologies for absence or attendance details. Just to remind everybody that we are recording the meeting and by joining you accept the fact that we are recording. Apologies, Michelle?
Yes, we have apologies from Councillor Jeff Jones and Wendy Fitzgerald.
Okay, then the next item is what is the next item? Oh, declarations of personal and prejudicial interest for members and officers. Okay, well, thank you. Prohibition of and declaration of party whips, I think that goes without saying. Public questions. Now, we have had an answer for that. I don't know, has everybody seen that answer?
Sorry, Chris. The answer we've had, sorry, it's not a public question. It was relating to item 5.
Sorry, I apologise. It's Peter's question, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Peter, are you happy with the answer? Well,
I think so. I think so, Chris.
That's
Thank you.
Isn't the right way.
Considered it carefully. I mean, the purpose behind my question was really to establish that we as a council are satisfied that in terms of conditions attached to planning permissions, particularly as they relate to ecological impacts of any particular development, that we are satisfied that we have adequate arrangements in place to ensure that any conditions that we might attach are actually being met. So it's really a concern. It was a concern raised by my Natural Environment Inquiry panel back in 2018, 2019, when we were informed by planning officers that for reasons of austerity, we now lack the numbers of monitoring officers required to ensure compliance. So I was simply concerned as to whether our recently appointed planning ecologist has the role or the capacity to perform that monitoring function. But I'm satisfied from the answer that we've received that he's in a position to do so. So yes, long-winded way of saying yes. Thank you. I'm an ex-civil servant, by the way, Chris, so you'll understand. I never use one word when I can use 10.
I think you have got part of the civil service blood in your veins there on that one. Okay, the next item on the agenda is procurement in the Education Directorate. Now, Robert, do you want to start with this and then go on to Brian?
Yes, thank you, Jack. I just open up the item and I thank the officers who prepared the report that's before you. I think that outlines the processes that the Education Directorate uses across the different forms of procurement that's undertaken by the Directorate. Obviously, we work in partnership with schools. We work in partnership with Welsh Government to procure a significant amount of what is spent within the Education Directorate, as well as what we ourselves are responsible for. And I think the report meet on the bones and provides a clear summary of the processes that are followed and the different areas of expenditure. And perhaps if I can call on Brian to come in and talk us through the report, and when I can come back at the end of the report, if that's acceptable, Chair.
Yeah, that's fine, Robert. Okay, Brian.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, as has been said, we have sought to provide as much input into this review as possible. Obviously, there's a balance to be met, isn't there, between the amount of detail that's practical to include, but also trying to keep seeking to capture and highlight those sort of key aspects for you. So if it's helpful, I will try and sort of highlight those key aspects, you know, and take you through the sort of the structure of the report, and then please do you know, chid me along if I'm taking too long, or if I'm glossing over something, then please you know, ask for a bit more detail on that. Let's start with well, at the beginning, which is the best place to start usually, isn't it? The first key point I think that is I should say really is the most effective controls, in my experience, exist where there is ownership of issues and ownership of the need for robust processes. So, in other words, where it's not simply a matter of a kind of a policing role at the centre, but where there is actually that ownership and that understanding of the need for those robust practices. And so for that reason, the point, paragraph 1.2 and 2.2, they set out in broad terms the robust sort of overarching governance and assurance framework, which is so critical, not just for this area of procurement, but obviously as the basis for all internal controls and processes, etc., within the directorate. But this is fundamentally important because it's the strength of that basis, that framework, which provides that strong, robust basis for specific procurement needs and areas of support. So I've kind of just highlighted those key aspects of that framework, where you've got clear strategies, objectives and linkages, where you've got robust risk management, mapping, monitoring, mitigating and escalating as appropriate those risks, where you've got tight internal controls through, you know, all those broad areas that we're kind of mentioning there, and also reassurance and scrutiny. So audit and scrutiny is key. So I think that to me is a critical, you know, as a foundational sort of start to the discussion, really. Now then, in terms of the second most, I think, critical point is set out in paragraph 2.1, because it's really important to recognise the extent to which direct procurement is limited within the Education Directorate. You know, we do have a large budget as an Education Directorate, but a significant element of that, by far the lion's share, very significant amount, is delegated directly to schools. And then when you look and break down the other elements, you can see the limitation to how much procurement we actually do undertake directly as a directorate. So I've tried to flag here the most significant by far in terms of the areas of procurement. The first one there, home to school transport. Now, any contracts here with transport operators and taxi firms are managed by the director on behalf, on the director's behalf, sorry, by the transportation team, and that team regularly re-tender those contracts to seek to ensure the most cost-effective arrangements. That is a very significant budget within the directorate, though. You're talking about more than £8 million there for home school transport. Another significant budget is the independent and out-of-county placement budget and associated costs, where we don't have specialist provision that we can offer in any other way within county or within the mainstream sector. Now, we have a far-reaching long-term strategy to, as far as possible, enhance the availability of that specialist provision within county, and in so doing mitigate the scale of the costs from external placements, because over time we are seeing an escalation in the cost of those placements, and besides which it's not the best way of meeting the needs of pupils. It's far better to have that need being met more locally for the family and for the pupil concerned. So as I say, we have a long-term strategy there, the most recent of which has been our statutory consultation to increase the number of special school places at Pen-y-Bryn. And that is part of as I say, a wide-ranging strategy across services within the directorate. The third area there, catering and cleaning supplies, we do procure those supplies with the support of corporate teams. It'd be fair to say that through the current pandemic, we have at times had to be a bit more flexible in terms of how we have procured some supplies, because there's been changing needs and national local expectations for the service. But nevertheless, as I say, we've done that largely still through the good support of corporate colleagues and teams. The next area there, in terms of IT hardware license costs, you know, not as large a sum, but nevertheless a significant sum. Particularly that supports our SIMS and One systems to support schools. Those costs are managed in partnership with the good support of our colleagues in corporate IT to again ensure value for money. And at the moment, we are specifically looking at the future sustainability of the hardware and the license and the systems costs that we incur, trying to sort of look at cloud options and so on for the future, and also ways in which we might mitigate those costs looking ahead into future years. We have some smaller areas of spending. A good example would be property related security, health and safety needs, possibly where they crop up. All those things are dealt with through corporate framework. Then we have the pupil referral unit, which whilst it's a non-delegated sort of budget, it is effectively a school in terms of its day-to-day management. But as I say, that is required to follow corporate procurement processes. And then the final area there, in terms of capital, we obviously have a very significant capital investment programme through our 21st Century Schools programme, and all of those works to deliver the schemes within that programme are tendered and contracted and then delivered in accordance with corporate requirements through corporate building services. There are some very limited services that we procure directly, for example, when we're you know, in terms of removal of items, you know, when we're moving a school into its new build and so on. Right, let me just draw breath there. I've said quite a lot there. Is it best if I just continue on and pick up issues at the end, or is there anything as we go through that?
Have any members got any questions they would like to ask Brian? Because this is, oh, hang on, Mary, Councillor Mary Sherwood.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I was going to say, early on in the report, it mentions the importance of having a cost-effective outcome. For example, under homeschool transport, it mentions that. But I think in this panel, we're quite interested in supporting local business and enhancing local procurement. Could you say something about how that happens within the Education Directorate? I mean, whether is it just cost effectiveness that's the most important thing, or is supporting local businesses also considered to be important? Thanks.
Okay, can you bear with me while I do say a bit more on the other parts of the report, because I think you'll see that comes out when we start talking about the future well-being of future generations aspect, because and the discussions we're having with the Welsh Government, and I think that will answer your point there, and then please come back in if it doesn't answer it sufficiently. Is that okay, Mary? Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? If not, well, Brian, can you continue? Oh, sorry, Peter, Councillor Peter Jones. Peter, you got your hand up?
Oh, thank you, Chair. My question also related to home to school transport. I fully accept that procurement has a major focus on cost and of course quality of delivery. And I'm just wondering about whether in terms of discussions with transport companies, we also include a procurement requirement that there must be effective pollution management. This is an issue, of course, that has been raised in other places on this council, by me particularly, in the past. And it certainly is a continuing concern when one looks at the figures on the impacts of poor air quality on health and death. So I'm just wondering, in our procurement discussions with transport companies, how much do we take account of their assurances and behaviour in terms of ensuring that bus transport in particular, when waiting at schools, that engines are turned off to minimise pollution? Thank you, Chair.
Right. I mean, that is an interesting one. Obviously, the section paragraph 2.1 is making the point that in terms of home to school transport, that is managed on our behalf by a transportation team colleagues, and so they are, very hot on a whole host of things, including those ones that have been mentioned there. And we would obviously support the transportation team. We regularly meet with them and we discuss issues and support them in that way, but we wouldn't directly be able to sort of impact on that in a sense. But I mean, they're very good points, and we would obviously wish to see see that wider assessment of any procurement decisions. It is relevant to what I will be saying about the well-being of future generations, as I say, as well, because I think you'll see, sorry, I'm jumping ahead a little bit there, but you'll see there that we are trying to sort of balance the pure value for money side of things with those wider elements, and with support nationally, I think that you'll see a little bit more of that coming together. Shall I move on, and then I'll probably get to that
then
point.
carry on then, Brian.
Right, thank you very much, Chris. Right, sorry, let me just pick up where I was. Right, so clearly where we do have direct procurement that is undertaken within the directorate, that's undertaken within each team that we have, and we ensure appropriate arrangements for the placing of orders, the authorization of transactions, making sure there's appropriate segregation of duties, all those things that you would expect to be in place. In terms of ensuring cost-effective and transparent procurement, because inevitably, however much we would like there to be sort of some wider sort of factors that are taken into account, we have an obligation as a council to demonstrate cost-effective, value for money in what we do spend a budget on. We do, as I say, we do follow those council processes. We utilise corporate contracts, and wherever possible, any corporate procurement frameworks and so on. And we do have that continuing robust scrutiny and challenge through our PFM processes. We also have regular budget monitoring meetings with budget holders across the directorate, and we would also pick up issues that colleagues in internal audit would raise. As I say, paragraph 2.5 just makes the point that we do make use of locally agreed frameworks and guidance from the corporate centre. Capital contracts in a particular also make use of regional frameworks, and we have more recently as an authority signed up to the Welsh Government Strategic Partnering Agreement, which again will enable us to deliver the revenue funded elements within the 21st Century Schools programme under what's known as the mutual investment model. Now, this is the point that Mary was asking about in terms of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. The principles that underpin that act are embedded in the operation of the directorate. In fact, the very nature of education provision, the planning for future education provision, is absolutely essential that we have that long-term planning, and that's what we have, both in terms, you can see obviously in the 21st Century Schools programme and our capital investment programme for schools. and our planning for school places, but you also see it in terms of our medium-term rolling medium-term financial plan, and we always plan beyond simply 1 year ahead. So those things are kind of embedded there. Collaboration, involvement with stakeholders. We put a considerable amount of effort in each year on those aspects. The joining up of strategies, actions, processes, and early intervention and prevention is key in a lot of our strategies around additional learning needs. So as I say, we do try to embed that within all that we do as a directorate. When it comes to school building projects, we have particularly focused on building efficiency. So we meet the standards, well, and go above that if we can in terms of building efficiency. We recycle furniture and materials very effectively, in my understanding, and we look for potential linkages with the curriculum, with the engagement of pupils and wider stakeholder groups, so that even the process of delivering a new build school is almost linked in with the delivery of the curriculum, in a sense, and pupils can feel part of that. They can understand what we are doing from an environmental point of view and building efficiency, capturing water and utilising that through the build, in terms of energy efficiency, the way the school's designed to minimise the heating required, and so on, aspects of ventilation and so on. What we would like as an aspiration for the next phase of projects is for those projects to be net zero carbon in terms of the delivery, and we are working already on that. In fact, the most recent business case that we've submitted to the Welsh Government does have that net zero carbon sort of aspect built into that. There's a cost premium to doing that. There's an additional cost, but we will seek to meet that cost through what we understand is a specific funding pot that the Welsh Government, well, we hope the Welsh Government will make available to us. So as I say, we're trying to pick up those points, and as I say, we're working closely with the Welsh Government in that respect.
Brian, can I stop you there for a minute?
Yes, of course you can.
Mike White, Councillor Mike White has got his hand up. Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, really question directed to Chris and perhaps Adam, if possible. I know that schools have had difficulties, with they go through procurement and different ways of getting in services, which you've obviously picked up within audit. Is there a possibility that when they go to providers, the providers can actually provide costings or catalogues, or they got an idea what they want to purchase, so they got an idea then that the actual outlay is actually going to be to the school, because I think this is I think would really help schools when they know that what they want to purchase and the cost, and also that they are going to provide value for money. But I don't know whether that would be possible, Chris or Adam, if that could be looked at.
Can I ask that Chris and Adam answer that later on in the report, because in the report it comes into about financial training for managers and budget holding resolution. So if we can come back to that, Mike.
Yes, certainly, Chair.
And then Brian, if you can continue, because there's a couple of issues to go forward. And then if we can clear them and then come back to that question.
Okay, happy to do that, Chair. Thank you. In terms of impact assessments, we have integrated impact assessment screening, which we do for all our capital projects, and well, indeed all our reports that we put together and our reviews of services and so on. as well as obviously the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act assessment that we do. And as I say, those processes are embedded in the way we operate. As chair, as you said, recognise the financial training for managers and budget holders is an important aspect here. Hence my comment at the start about the importance of ownership of these issues and of the need for these processes. Processes are not there just to be awkward and to make life difficult for managers. They're there for a very good reason, and that's what we focus on getting across through our regular meetings and our formal financial training. So we include in that the council's financial governance around financial procedure rules, which is obviously the control framework for managing our financial affairs, accounting instructions, contract procedure rules, and so on. We are always reminding about corporate spending restrictions and other needs and expectations that are made apparent in terms of the procurement bans for ordering and paying for goods and services, and in terms of supply agency framework waivers and so on. Most recently, my colleague Kelly Small has been doing specific sessions on the implications on worker status, the IR35 change. That's been very useful, very important to do that training. So that's just illustrative of the sort of things that we do. I think I've mentioned already about the independent placements and out-of-county placements. We do carefully monitor and review those as part of our overall strategy to enhance capacity for in-house specialist provision. So our service level agreements with schools are very important. We specifically review these each year as part of a very well established process through the School Budget Forum and its working groups. That is to ensure that those service level agreements remain fit for purpose. They actually provide the services that school needs, and that they are transparent and they're clearly costed, and those costs reflect the true cost of delivering those services. So as I say, an awful lot of work goes into that. We coordinate that from Kelly's very small team, along with the 101 other things that the team does. And I think that has worked really well. That has developed extremely well over the years. In terms of capital projects, there's routine monitoring by the project team, the CDM, client rep, clerk of works, all those things, quantity values, you name it. Any financial claims are scrutinised and disputed if appropriate, and risks and issues are escalated. We have a very well established embedded governance process for the whole QED programme. In terms of the 21st Century Schools programme going up a level more nationally, we're required to comply with a whole number of conditions that come with the funding that the Welsh Government provide to us, and procurement, it needs to be, should be undertaken via an approved Welsh Government framework, and that's what we do, working through our colleagues in Corporate Building Services. We complete all the reports and statements, etc., that we have to submit to the Welsh Government. There's a normal retentions that's withheld until we've completed and signed off finally each scheme, and we are scrutinised rigorously by the Welsh Government about our schemes. Each scheme has to, before we even draw down the funding, we have to go through a whole series of hoops we have to jump through in terms of the different business cases and so on, clarifying points and so on, and that all comes out through that process. Now, there was a few other points that we've tried to cover here. because we understood that you'd be interested specifically in them. In terms of the impact of leaving the European Union, I think it'd be fair to say that the jury's out in terms of the specific, how much of an impact that is having. But there certainly are concerns, particularly around catering provisions and construction contracts. There are supply chain issues, labour shortages, and there are undoubtedly increased costs. And whatever that is in terms of the calls, the fact is that will impact on the costs and so on, and the delivery of provision services and capital projects looking ahead. In paragraph 213, this is the point I'm trying to particularly pick up, the issue that Mary was raising earlier. I think it feels to me that there is a sort of a national change or revision, let's say, of policy that might be needed, because if we want to develop our procurement practices and through regional frameworks, etc., to pick up the points that Mary was raising about a local providers, etc., then I think that just needs to be looked at that Welsh Government national level, because it's a very difficult to get that balance between capacity to deliver on the size of schemes that we're talking about, certainly the capital schemes, and the fact that we would like to have the locality there and reduce embedded carbon costs and so on in terms of distance. Now, in the discussions that Louise, Herbert Evans and myself have had with particularly one of the key officials in the Welsh Government in this area, we have been discussing how we can in future more clearly make allowance for the kind of the distance that materials have travelled, let's say, and the amount of carbon sort of impact that has when we are evaluating between different tenders and so on. Now, I think that will develop over time. At the moment, we're not there, because I don't think the processes that we have to go through particularly facilitate that or encourage that at the moment. But that's something that certainly discussions are taking place at present. At the moment, we are tied to a cost standard that the Welsh Government provide, that basically they benchmark against national building costs for schools, and they will not fund us if our scheme delivery costs go in excess of those benchmarked sort of cost standards that they've set in place. Now, sometimes you can claim for what's termed abnormal. So if you've got ground conditions, mean that there are some additional costs and so on. But we have to make the case in each case. We need to argue that, and successfully, if we want the Welsh Government to support that level of cost. I think I better pause there if I may, because then we come into the schools, which is a slightly different.
Yeah, I think the overall central procurement issues that you've been talking about are generally on a council-wide operation. So I think, if we go into the schools now, because I know there's quite a few people want to ask questions on schools. So if there's anything on the general idea about procurement on the nation, I think the one issue that people have picked up on is the home to school transport is one which I think we will come back to at some stage before we finish this report, because that's an incredibly important issue, especially considering the environmental issues that are going to be surrounding that as well. And I think the other issue we need to talk about at some stage, but I think again we'll have to come back to that, is the way in which you just mentioned about the procurement guide for home, when we are building, how it fits into the current situation with the Welsh Government and about how we procure local issues, because in England, if you read some of that Preston report, there's definitely a real more of a willingness then, if you like, to actually procure locally than there is under some of the regulations that we have under the 5-case business model. So if there are no other questions on the general council-wide education procurement, can we then go on now to the schools, because I think that's the one that is important for many people on this. Robert, you had your hand up.
Just come in, before we move on to schools, because I think Brian has outlined the processes that the directorate follows. These are corporate regulations, they're a corporate approach, and I think if we are to move forward to a more localized procurement, and I know we've discussed things in the education PDC, for instance, and the skill links it out with the skills agenda and everything else. That needs an all Wales and an all council approach rather than changes by the directorate itself. And I think we are looking at that and looking at what needs to be changed to enable that to happen, and what capacity building at provider level needs to happen for that to be to become a reality as well.
Okay, thank you. Then Brian, can we continue on 214?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. Now, as I said at the start, and you'll all recognise, the schools do have by far the lion's share of the directorate budget. It's delegated to them, and include they are autonomous in terms of how they utilise that delegated budget. Obviously, we do provide close support, oversight, and training and advice to them in that task. As I say, again, the point I made at the start is important, critical that there's ownership and recognition of the importance of the processes that are there, and why schools should be following those appropriate, correct procedures. We do work closely with other teams across the council as well, because there's a lot of support that is provided by teams within other directorates, not just in terms of the education directorate. Paragraph 215 just gives a bit of an update on the procurement guide for schools, which we have been putting a lot of work into updating this. In fact, the guide itself is pretty much there and updated now and ready. That's guidance, obviously trying to encourage best practice as well as proper compliance with appropriate rules and procedures, etc. So, as I say, we hope to be in a position to be able to sort of share that or issue that formally to schools through later in this term. The difficulty we've got with it, to be honest, is not the guide itself, which, as I say, has been pretty much finished in terms of the update, but it's the fact that the guide inevitably makes cross references with other documents, particularly accounting instructions and so on, and we're a bit concerned about issuing the guide unless until those documents as well have been appropriately updated to make sure that they are consistent. See what I mean? So that's the stage we're at. Sorry, I'm just telling you warts and all, I guess, really where we are there with it. And obviously we're doing it with the very limited capacity and resource we have available to focus on it as well. In terms of that guide, it's quite wide ranging what it does provide to schools. It's intended for use both by governors and by school staff. And as I say, it's to encourage use of best practice and so on. So I suppose the key things is informing schools about the rules and the procedures in place for procuring goods, works and services. Again, it's pushing that point, which I've said all the way through, about the importance of the need to comply, that it's not there just to be awkward, it's there for a good reason, safeguard schools and school staff, not just to suit the council. And then also identifying channels of support. So you've got the sections within it is covers the process, dispensations in terms of single supplier tenders, waivers, and it also includes some frequently asked questions. Hopefully it will remain a kind of a living document that we can continue to update and develop as we're able, you know, rather than something that will schools stick on the shelf, so to speak. Schools are encouraged to use council contracts wherever possible, because we do genuinely think there's a lot of real benefits from that, which are set out in paragraph 216. So, you know, we always are reminding schools about those benefits and the fact that otherwise, if they don't use council contracts, then they need to satisfy themselves about those things. I think most heads are wise enough to realise that you know, there is sense in going with utilising council contracts. We've also developed the landlord's consent process and reviewed that more very recently, updating the guidance and the forms that are required for such applications. That is really important because we do, as landlord, we need to know what schools are doing in terms of the school assets and so on, things that could affect the capacity and the admission number of a school and so on. It should enable us to have greater oversight over time of schools' expenditure on buildings as well, and an improved assurance of the school's compliance.
Can I stop you there, Brian?
Yeah,
and go back to the question that Councillor Mike White asked you about procurement in schools, because you covered, I think, possibly the important parts in that. And Mike, would you like to re-ask your question?
Yes, to help and support schools, Brian, if the schools could actually get sort of prices or a catalogue from suppliers, so they know then exactly what the outlay is going to be, and also to show that they are going to provide best value and value for money. I think that this would definitely support schools. And as I said previously, I think it would be very important to schools as well, if to involve the governors as well. Perhaps if they had a sort of a subcommittee for dealing with the actual issues on procurement, and the schools could have perhaps with guidance from county, could have a terms of reference so they could put into policy, so that they know that they got there's a framework that they could follow and give them support.
Yeah, I think there's some really important points there, which I totally agree with, and indeed what we would try to encourage. I think you're exactly right in terms of the fact that for me it's really helpful if a school can have an indication of the sort of costs that would be incurred for some of the standard works and things that they would need. So if they know, you know, if they've got to fix a tap or replace a tap or whatever, generally what that sort of you know, off the menu, what that sort of cost might be, I think that would be very helpful. So we do try and encourage that, and in our discussion we had discussions with our colleagues in facilities management, you know, corporate building services, about things like that. That is exactly what we would like to see, and I think heads have said as much themselves. I also like the idea about, you know, the working with schools, as you would expect, because we've always sought to do that through the school budget forum in a whole host of different ways. We've tried to do it in procurement previously as well, and I think now is a really good time with the relaunch of the updated school procurement guide to do that again, and I've been in discussions with Chris. You know, we've already talked about this, in fact we've already asked for nominations from schools for reps to be on a procurement kind of, I can't think what we said we'd call it, Chris, but anyway, procurement sort of working group, effectively, to where we can try and tease out some of these things. What sort of support and advice, further support and advice, do schools need, and you know, what might be in a position to offer to them. You know, those sort of things. I think that's really useful. So totally agree, really, in terms of trying to take those things forward. Well, we'll build on what we already have in that regard.
Yeah,
Chris,
can I
would you
just
like-
come back there, Chair, if you don't mind?
Can Chris Williams answer
Yes.
first of all, Mike?
Yeah.
Chris.
Yeah, it was to again to agree with Brian on your point, Councillor White, about the subgroup to work with schools. We recognise we'd like to more deeply embed the relationship. It can be sometimes quite difficult because there are a lot of schools, and often they themselves don't necessarily agree on one thing that they all want. So there's quite a lot of dialogue that needs to be built in, but it's developing that understanding between us, spotting the gaps and so forth, and looking where we can come and create some common solutions. The pandemic has obviously hit us very hard in terms of our relationships, you know, with a strong focus towards whether it was hand sanitizer or supporting PPE. But as Brian said, you know, we're working in the background, the schools guide, this kind of lead document to help explain to schools effectively, to give them better clarity on how they can work, is a key part of that key plank of the program we've got in place. And I'm attending, I think, Brian, this week, aren't they, the cross-phase meeting for schools conference, where we'll be dealing with all the schools to publicise this and deepen the links. On the point about the catalogue for schools, I mean, the way in which I prefer to work on this is that if a school identifies a need, they can come to my team, and then I will find the best contract in the contract that exists in the contract in the council that best fits that need, and then introduce them to the contract manager of that contract. The reason for that is, again, there are many shades, you know, in the rainbow of what people want through these contracts, and it's often an issue of the kind of comparing apples with apples and oranges scenario, where, for example, a school might come and say, "Oh, I could get this piece of IT equipment for £100 cheaper than I've heard from elsewhere." But you really need to understand the specification that's driven that comment.
Yeah.
You know, to have antivirus software, very critical kind of protections need to be put on electronic devices now for children. So it's just, I'm just trying to give you a bit of a flavour of the dialogue that we need to have behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And because also there's a concept around the suppliers' terms and conditions. You know, as a council, we put very decent quality, robust contracts in place that protect all parties. Whereas if a supplier is coming to you directly, they might be making the bias towards them, where they've got no liability if anything goes wrong, for example. So there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes. But to go back to your core point about the subgroup, about helping schools, as Brian said, fundamentally agree, and it's a core part of what we're focused on. Thank you.
Okay, Mike, if you would.
Yes, yeah. What I was indicating to give support that each school was on board is perhaps the schools, you know, so the governing body, the schools had a subcommittee. You know, obviously, if you were, I would set a group up of linking have a nominated group, perhaps to go to feedback to the local authority. But if each schools had that system in place through a subcommittee, so that they had the terms of reference as well. So when the head teacher was coming forward for perhaps to have work done, whatever, at least, you know, that group could look at that and see that obviously we could put the actual rules and procedures in place, and then obviously then take it back to the full governing body if we needed ratification. But at least then, if that system was there in place, at least each schools would know the actual procedure. You know, because I know that there has been instances with all governors of schools when we've had a price internally from our own corporate building services, and when the quota come back, you obviously had to sit down and think, are they really asking this much for that piece of equipment or that work to be done? This is what I'm saying, and I feel this is where it's important that we have a list of approved suppliers, so that the schools will go through to. I know it's important that we use our own in-house service if possible, but at least then we've got that list of approved suppliers, but we also got ideas on how much the actual price of the job is actually going to be.
Yeah, if I could just comment on that, Mike. I agree with what you're saying there, and I've already mentioned that we do continue to encourage our schools to utilise available council contracts and services and support where that is available. And always, maybe a bit of exaggeration, I am regularly in discussion with head teachers, making the point that they do need to make sure they are comparing apples with apples if they are comparing a costing from corporate building services and an alternative quote that they may get. Make sure that they are being quoted for exactly the same work. I think that is absolutely critical. I always challenge a head who says in publicly, oh well, I could get it for half the price by someone else, so this is not cost effective. And I always say, look, give me the examples and I'll happily follow up on that. Whenever that has happened, quite honestly, I can say I have never found an instance that's been flagged to me where there hasn't been some confusion because they've been comparing apples and oranges rather than apples and apples. Now, to be fair to schools, it's not all on the school side, and I've also regularly been in discussion with corporate building services and facilities management, because I do feel in the past they have not done themselves any favours, because with the best of intentions, sometimes they're asked to cost up certain works on, say, refurbishing a toilet, and then they'll include things like, oh well, if we're knocking all the tiles off, we'll rewire it and update the wiring at the same time, and they include that in the cost as well. Now, that's no good to a school, because if a school hasn't got the money to do the proper job, even though it's sensible, you're costing yourself out of the job, aren't you? So I'm always making the point both ways. To schools, be realistic, make sure you are comparing genuinely like with like, but also for corporate building services, for goodness sake, cost up what the school is asking for. Now, if from a technical point of view, it would make very good sense to do something else at the same time, well, okay, make that point and give the school the choice of that. But don't just assume, even if they do know better than the school, so to speak, don't just assume that that's what therefore the school should do, because they're a customer at the end of the day and they can go somewhere else. Does that kind of make sense?
Yes, you got it spot on. As I say, I've had instances where we've asked for something quite, straightforward, and when the costs come back, you obviously got to scratch your head and think, are they just pick this figure off the shelf? Do you know what I mean?
Okay, thank you, Mike. I got Adam and Lyndon. Adam, is this on the same subject?
It is, Chris, if I may. It was just to just confirm really what Brian and Chris have said, but and just to give some reassurance, a lot of the schools within their governing bodies do have subgroups that are either business and resources, or they have a working group for building repair and maintenance, for example, and a lot of those areas are where that would be picked up. So I just wouldn't want us to be trying to impose, I guess, on schools how they should or shouldn't operate, and what working groups they should or shouldn't have. That they already have a good system in place. I think where we've identified that there could be an improvement is, as both Chris and Brian have said, in terms of the working group, whereby we can raise those concerns and opportunities and the risks associated with the procurement process that schools may get into, and certainly the examples that Brian gave in terms of extra work, although sometimes would be seen as an additional cost and wouldn't be apples and apples, it is important that we do that work to make sure that schools are aware of added value that can happen through sort of the council contracts that we have, because it will be either a greater risk to the school if we don't do those works, or it'll cost them more in the long run. So sometimes it's about prioritization, but I think it's how we get that message through our various services. And that working group, though, would really help the schools identify that they are doing those comparisons and where they may fall into issues where they're not looking at the whole life cost of something.
Yeah.
You might be able to get something cheap and cheerful very quickly. You know, take a tap, I think, as Chris mentioned, you know, you could just fit a tap. But if it's a bespoke tap that's shipped in from abroad, or if it's a very poor quality tap, you could replace that a number of times, you know, buy cheap, buy twice sort of thing. So it's about standards, it's about quality, it's about workmanship, it's about all that added value that comes in. And I think that working group led through Chris and Brian will be really good in terms of getting that consistency of standard and awareness of what happens in and around that procurement process.
Yeah,
Okay.
if I might, sorry, Chris, if I might just add to, you know, and reinforce what Adam's just said there. I mean, we do have a premises working group. There's a subgroup of the School Budget Forum, and that has been very effective over a number of years. And the group, the procurement group that Chris and I have talked about, that effectively would complement that. It would build on the benefits we've seen over a number of years from that premises working group, because that really has helped to get a better understanding of processes, the need for proper processes, and some of those choices that Adam helpfully had talked through and flagged there. So I think that really is that really is important. And schools do have obviously autonomy, and they do organise themselves as they see fit, but they would have a finance committee, they would have a premises, I'm sure they probably most would have a premises committee, and so they do have the structures in place to kind of you know, do that as well. If we continue building on the good work and the developments that we've seen in a number of years, then as I say, hopefully we're going in the right direction here. Sorry to jump in there, because I know Lyndon's had his hand up for a long while, but it's just relevant for the points that have been raised. Right. Ooh.
I think we've just lost the chair momentarily, so if we just give him 30 seconds to rejoin.
That's me.
See if I can call him in, see if he's maybe we could just continue with Lyndon's question, and hopefully in the meantime he'll have made his way back. Would that be okay?
Okay. Yeah, what I was going to ask, obviously schools getting work done and buying goods, is there an opportunity or a platform for them to feed their experiences in about those companies they've been dealing with, good or bad? Because that could be quite useful and informative for you as well, Brian and Chris. I do agree with the point that you make as well about the apples and oranges. You've got to be so careful on that, because certainly the governing body I was on, we were looking at something, and when you actually compared the quality, it was quite different. So that does need to be brought into account. Thanks.
Yeah. In my, thank you, Lyndon. I mean, in my experience, schools have a very, very effective sort of grapevine, you know, links with their other schools and so on, and peers. And so from that point of view, good experiences, you know, I'm fairly confident, you know, are sort of shared. Unfortunately, I suspect bad experiences are shared even more readily. And so I think that, again, is something really important for colleagues in corporate building services, because it only takes one bad experience to undo an awful lot of the really good work that they do on a whole host of other schools. And if Murphy's Law applies and it happens to be the school that has the problem happens to be a head that's a particularly vocal one in head teacher meetings, then that soon gets shared incredibly quickly, in my experience. I do take your point though, and I think through the school budget forum, through the different working groups, the premises group that I've mentioned already, and what Chris and I are talking about in terms of a procurement group, I think those are ways in which hopefully that would encourage that sharing of experiences. The most valuable, in my view, the most valuable way of schools developing and building on their knowledge and skill effectively, whether it's procurement, whether it's budget monitoring, whatever, is actually in them sharing their experiences with each other. I don't think they should, well, I don't think they can anymore simply look to the council to provide all the support and advice on everything. We're just not resourced to do it. We don't have the capacity or the resilience now, because over the years we have consistently prioritised the funding of the delegated schools budget. So the bulk of the funding is with schools. No getting away from that. We don't have the capacity in the centre, and the schools need to increasingly work collaboratively with each other, as I say, sharing knowledge, experiences and so on, exactly the way you've sort of mentioned, Lyndon, and we try and genuinely facilitate that in every way we can.
Okay, thanks. If that could, I'm just thinking as the way that could be formalised in some way, so it is on an agenda item at those meetings.
Well, in a way, we are trying to do that in the cross-phase heads meeting that we've got on Thursday that Chris referred to earlier. Chris and I have pretty much got the whole agenda, and we're devoting it to budget matters and procurement. And so we are going to be encouraging them to, because there's nothing worse than listening to me for an hour and a half, I promise you. So, you know, we want that to be interactive. We'll be trying to encourage them to ask questions, share their points and so on. We do that through the quite well the regular meetings that we do have with our head teachers as a whole, in terms of sector meetings, but also we have with their representatives, whether it be through the working groups and the school budget forum or through their own groups. The secondary heads all meet together regularly, very regularly. The primary head representatives of each cluster, they meet together regularly, and Helen and other colleagues are regularly invited and input into those meetings. So there is quite an effective sort of, I say no, they are formal processes, you know, they are quite effective, you know, and so I think heads do share an awful lot of experience and issues with each other through those different channels.
I think it's clear from what Brian and Chris have said, you know, there's a lot of good work going on at the moment, and it's a matter of moving this forward, supporting the officers to take this forward, because I think it's formalising the systems that are already in place, and getting a much more systematic approach, and I think that is something that we're all working towards.
I'm sorry, my internet just collapsed. I don't know what happened, but anyway, back online now. I do apologise for that time I've been off. Are there any other members who want to have questions? No. With that being the case, can I thank you, Brian? Thank you, Robert. for your input. You know, it is very important that we have this discussion in scrutiny about procurement, because education is the largest budget in the council, and you know, we've discussed it for over an hour, which I think is only right and proper. But thank you very much for all your efforts.
Okay. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you both. The next item on the agenda, if I remember rightly, is the procurement on the central core services. Adam and I think David Hopkins, Councillor David Hopkins, is with us. So, David, do you want to start and then go over to Adam?
No, to be honest with you, Chris, I just welcome this opportunity to address you this morning and work with Scrutiny. We obviously look for your input to drive services forward and look for improvement. So more than happy to hand over to Adam, but just thank you for this opportunity.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. I won't say too much. I'll just do a little quick introduction, and then Chris will take you through the report itself, section by section, and then happy to take any questions. But the main report really provides an overview of the activity related to procurement within the Resources Directorate, and my thanks to Chris, because he's done all the heavy lifting on this report to get it here. As you'll be aware, you know, much of our procurement, as you heard through Brian's presentation, is where we support as a centre the majority of other services across the council. So we do have some large procurement, though, that sits within the Resources Directorate, such as new systems, licenses, and IT equipment that we then distribute out to the various departments. We have things like the photocopiers and printing that we have. Again, recharge comes back from that, but we set up those initial contacts. I was interested in Mary's question previously about the buying local, and that is one of the pushes that we try to do. Is it's not just buy local, but it's making sure that we work with local companies. And we're part of Swansea Major Employers Forum, and that enables us to encourage and allow businesses to understand what it's like and how they can best work with us, how they would apply the processes that we go through. So it's how can they do business with us. So really helps get that through. And then obviously one of the other areas that you'll be aware of that sort of sits arm's length but still within the centre, and that's the £2.1 billion pension fund that we operate within in the council also. So although we do govern it, and it's kind of arm's length from the main normal business, but you will be aware that we did win an award by the industry with the best approach to sustainable investment. So even in those where we have an influence, we continue to do that good work in terms of working together. And then I think the final bit, again, in relation to some of the questions that have been raised, is that that foundational economy. How do we make sure that the money recirculates not only within Wales, but in and around Swansea? So every pound that's spent is spent within us. So we attract new money in, and where people are spending, we encourage them to keep spending within local suppliers wherever possible. That's always difficult, and I'm sure Chris will talk more about this in terms of when you have a procurement, you've got to, everything that we've heard about, got to make sure that it is value for money, it is the best fit, it is the right product, and so on, which sometimes isn't easy to do with local providers. Perhaps they don't always have that same buying power. They may be smaller businesses. So that's where that the Employers Forum comes in, so that we can help show them how they could perhaps work together, work as a cooperative in a co-production style, in order to give them a greater access to the services and opportunities that we have as a council. So that's my little introduction, really. Chris, if you want to step in and just take us through the report.
Thank you very much. I'll put the report on the screen, if I may, so we can have a quick look at that. If I can make this a bit bigger. Yeah, so overview of central services or of the Resources Directorate. So in paragraph 1.1, they just provide a high-level overview of the various constituent parts, includes the finance function, which includes our audit function also, and the service centre, our legal, democratic services and business intelligence, human resources, communications, which incorporates design, print, and corporate health and safety, and also our digital and transformation services, which Adam mentioned with the sort of large IT contracts. As Adam mentioned, it's important to note there's a dual role for the directorate. It's important what we buy ourselves, absolutely, but it's equally, if not more important, the advice and support and infrastructure we provide for the whole organization. At the very beginning of the panel's inquiry, I provided a report on procurement activity, procurement processes. So that's one pillar of the type of support that the directorate provides. And we've heard about financial procedure rules and various support for grants and so forth. So this whole package of support comes together, as well as the sort of strategic layers that come together to help the whole organization make the best decisions that are possible with our buying power. So moving on to paragraph 2.2.1, I sort of break down each of the areas to show the type of things that all the services in the directorate would procure. We see IT packages, legal services, banking, electronic payments, and the list goes on. You can see a fair amount of services, software. You can see medical services, and again, the various range of technology that the council infrastructure, the whole council infrastructure exists upon. And there have been huge efforts and improvements in that sphere. So, for example, on the technology front, to develop resilience, to ensure security, and so forth. So all these advances are being integrated into our procurement program as part of the daily work that we do. So moving to paragraph 3, and these titles were from the original series of headings provided to us. So again, in this section around consistency of approach, we again talk about the rules, infrastructure, the frameworks we've got. The FPRs mentioned that are financial procedure rules, which guide officers in how they sign off the spend of funds. As I mentioned again, the contract procedure rules on how they sign off a contract, the sort of process that we go through to ensure consistency, to ensure high quality fundamentally in what we do. Brian mentioned grant funding 3.5. Those sources can bring their own terms and conditions, and it's vital we understand the funders' terms and conditions because we have to build that into the procurement activity. And if we don't, the grant funding body might wish to take that money back off us for whatever reason. So it's a very important governance process, a very important way of planning our spend, and we've got robust systems that deal with that. So paragraph 3.7, so there you're linking some of the activity back to policy, but as I've said before, we really do work across the whole organisation and supporting everything that's going on. But in the directorate in its own, we talk about the agile working policy, and of course the IT infrastructure that enables that, which has proved invaluable during the pandemic. We have our own networks as officers speaking to other authorities, and I could see in some of the fairly local ones in Southwest Wales, not all authorities were able to completely switch to home working in the way that we could in Swansea. So showing the quality of the infrastructure there. And then I mentioned later on our Cycle to Work programme, completely different part of the policy agenda, but that's led by our human resources programme that allows employees to purchase cycling related equipment, thereby supporting the green agenda. And another example I provide, which links to our legal services for democratic transparency, is a software solution we use to publicise decisions for the council. So I hope you get a feel for the broad range of things that go on. We've covered much of the procurement routes to market. I mean, I would just mention Crown Commercial Services, because that's a UK-wide service that does have implications. We do use that for some IT contracts, for example. So going back to Councillor White's point about ensuring value for money and ensuring suppliers that are vetted, you know, there are multiple ways in which we can do that. And for the very large scale contracts, that's one avenue. So I will keep going because I know we covered this in other meetings. We've talked about the various web resources. We talked about the various rules. 3.14 is an important point to make. And it links to what I said about the school's agenda, where a school might come to me and ask to buy a product, and then I can help them verify that. It's important that anything in this sort of increasingly technological world, it's almost getting to the stage where practically everything we buy has a technical impact. So even car parking equipment, for example, is linking to the internet now. So we need, through my team, we help ensure that there's that review, that verification of specification, that makes sure that all our systems get interlink and talk to each other. So that's a constant process that's going on in the background as we map and verify different parts of the organization's demands. You know, and that can happen in IT. The second bullet point relates to communications. You know, if a different department wants to print something, do we need to do that anymore? Should it be via the internet? Are there existing contracts? The type of questions we've discussed. So that process happens over and over. We sort of refer to it in shorthand as corporate grip, to make sure people aren't going off on 27 different directions and not making the best use of money, and making the best use of the expertise that exists in the organisation. And the final bullet point there is that RAP Cymru, the environmental consultancy funded by Welsh Government, they praised what we do in this area, because what it allows us to do is minimise resource use. You know, if somebody comes to me and says, oh, I want, I don't know, pick a different example, 100 desks, and in a different part of the organisation there's 100 desks sitting in, you know, that could be used, could be recycled, we capture that through this procurement process. We capture that through this corporate review of what's going on. And RAP Cymru, anyway, as an external body, we're thought that was a great way of working. So moving on to the next topic is about authorization of transactions. Again, this is very much a rule-based thing. You'll have heard this through all the directorates so far, where we have, you know, a number of people need to sign up for contract. And looking at paragraph 4.3, even then within a contract, you know, down to the specific orders, within those teams, there will always be more than one person checking those orders. And we talk in the second sentence about the P-card transactions, the purchase transactions, which are very helpful from an audit trail perspective, that, you know, there's no more petty cash as such, or that it's been very limited to using that type of payment mechanism, so we can track all the financial transactions of the authority. And obviously 4.4 staff are aware, you know, about the contract rules. It's very, as you have heard throughout this process, hopefully, that people are very much aware of the rules. It is there, they're designed to ensure best use of money. They're designed to protect officers as well. That, you know, we're not going straight to one supplier, that we are seeking the best solution for the authority. You know, we had a briefing by the South Wales Police. You know, they said, you know, procurement is always one of those areas that is targeted through fraud and so forth. And so having robust rules is very important fundamentally, and it gets best value, but it perfects the authority in a number of ways. Cost-effective and transparent process procurement. We've discussed in a previous meeting how we advertise opportunities to the market. So I won't dwell on that, but you know about the Sell to Wales system mentioned there in 5.4, where we go direct to market on those type of things. And that's a Welsh Government policy that provides, as you'll know, this one-stop shop. So if you're a Welsh company and you want to do business with the public sector in Wales, you know where to look. You don't have to look at every single different authority, and you don't want to miss anything. So they can register on the website, they can enter their codes that would define the sectors of interest to them, and then that website will deliver them a tailor-made notification of the type of opportunities that are in the market. Future Generations Act, I think Brian explained that very well in the way that it's incorporated into the planning activities of each of the directorates, and how we look at what we do. When we discussed the Place Directorate, for example, I remember we touched on electrical vehicle purchases, the Green Fleet Initiative, the More Homes Initiative of energy efficiency housing. That's how procurement translates into reality, where you go from rules but into outcomes. And I think it's through the analysis of the specification, which is where that is a very important part of the procurement process, and we pay a great deal of attention to that across the authority, and to push that consideration. As Adam, I briefly mentioned the pension fund, and as Adam mentioned, that was recently awarded recognition for its best practice in that area of moving to divest holdings of fossil fuels. And through our contract system, we will be looking to enforce core obligations of the public sector and the legal framework we operate in. And just to pick modern slavery as some point, anybody with a conviction for anything related to that would certainly not be a company we would deal with. And we check all new suppliers as and when they come onto our books, as it were. Equalities duty, again, a similar principle. I mean, all staff are trained in understanding the implication of the Act, but that then is embedded in the same way the Future Generations Act is into the plans of the authority. I didn't mention, but I can see I have here in 7.4, we have an access to services colleague who can help with looking at these impact assessments. So where we're looking to change what we do in any way, we will review this to make sure we're compliant and considering taking advantage of, to the best effect of, the relevant legislation. Talk about training for staff. There's a various range of resources we provide. You'll have heard again we've just discussed the Education Directorate and the sort of things we want to put in place there. And I recall the Place Director also, gave an overview of how this works in practice. So I'll keep going on for time's sake. Joint procurement activities. Again, I won't spend. Please feel free to interrupt me if I'm skipping through this too fast. But I recall we covered this joint procurement activities in a previous session. So the fundamental rule here is that if we are procuring, working in collaboration, say with another authority, then the lead authority will effectively assure the procurement activity. So we'll have gone through the machine, as it were, once, but then we will also provide a final layer of review before it enters into a contract on our register. So there is a very, again, rigorous and systematic approach to looking at who we contract with, on what basis, what are the rules, what are the terms and conditions, and so forth. And it's that systematized approach to attain high quality in what we do. Monitoring agreements. Adam will lead a regular financial performance review monthly to look at spend against procurement, spend against budgets, and so forth. And then each of the heads of service will also be tracking their contracts. We have, again, a number of layers of management and control that are built in to allow people to raise issues fundamentally, and to allow tracking and monitoring of procurement activity. And at the beginning of the inquiry, the audit team came along and they explained again, which is, it's a very helpful part of the process, I feel, that they will regularly check. They have a rolling program across the Resources Directorate, but also all directorates, to check what's going on and provide, again, that layer of assurance that we're on the right track in how we run things against all the rules and procedures. 10.7, and just taking one example down, our multifunction device contract. So that's all the printers and the scanning, which probably hasn't been used a great deal in the last 12 to 18 months, I guess, as we're all going very much email now. But, that just talks about how you would manage a contract, basically, with regular review, That's a large contract because it provides internal service, but also for schools. But again, it just shows the systematic approach to regularly meeting with the supplier and making sure things are functioning effectively. External auditing, we've talked about grant funders, that's part of the core part of it. We also have the Wales Audit Office, who will consider, on a case-by-case basis, certain things related to procurement. But there are no issues there that I'm aware of or to report on. And I think that's because we take a lot of care and attention to making sure we have good quality paperwork, we have proper audit trail. It's the type of robust, good quality stuff you'd see as best practice, basically. Adam, I might pass this next section to you on the effect of leaving the European Union on procurement activities, because in my understanding at this time, I know we've had a hit to things like IT, but I know you're involved in a broader sweep of issues.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. As many members will know, obviously there's a double whammy in this. So although we do talk about leaving the EU as a fundamental issue, this is also wrapped up almost in that perfect storm with COVID, in terms of many businesses stopped working for a fair length of time. You've seen the impact just more recently in terms of fuel shortage. We have a lot of issues with the supply chains, not in terms of we can't get it, but some of it is in terms of the cost, in terms of supply and demand. So certainly for building materials has increased considerably. Some supplies are delayed in being received, things like plasterboard, and the labour market that we usually are able to draw down from agencies or from the market. The same level of staff are not available on the result of this. So I lead an EU exit working group, a strategic group for the authority, along with the leader. And in doing that, what we are doing is looking across all service areas to see where the tensions are, any difficulties, and being able to respond. For example, in education, recently.
I think Adam's frozen, is he?
I think so. Shall I carry on, Mr.
Yeah, you can do, Chris.
Okay, come back to that. So the final section report, with the query posed to us is how, what we can improve on. I mentioned in 13.1, I'm part of an All Wales group. And I think, it's come up in a number of conversations about how things need to move forward on an All Wales level often. The Future Generations Commissioner has a strong focus on procurement, which is welcome. Released a report in the last 12 months on this matter, which I took to be, I think we're on the right track in what we're doing. I mentioned some of the initiative, that's great. But I think from her comments that she wants the Welsh Government to take a more, how can I put it, a sort of more clarifying role, in the sense of providing a bit more meat on the bone of what exactly perhaps is the best specification. For example, we might say we want Green Fleet, but there might be 20 different versions of Green Fleet, and perhaps that more specification, research, development type component, plus perhaps a process at the All Wales level. But I suppose the positive, and it is positive, is the focus is there. People are really engaged into this agenda. We all know we've got a huge piece of work to keep pushing this forward. I'm sure you're like me, and I'm kind of never happy at where I'm at. I always want to improve. I always want things to get better, and I think that's the drive I see from a lot of people, and it's shared across Wales and in Swansea. So there's all that work going on. Adam mentioned the Swansea Major Employers Forum, so that's another network for sharing best practice. We had tried, and Councillor Hopkins has been the biggest advocate of this, to get local businesses in a room and to do a big event. But of course, with the pandemic times, this has just dragged on a bit. So I'm going to do a video-based version of this for local companies, at least to get them for this stage with the information in their hands about how all the major organizations in Swansea work, how they can do business with us. I put a link to our guide, which has been very well received, because it's providing that clarity to people from outside the organization who don't normally deal with us, who find the whole process a bit, well, not a bit, probably very overwhelming at the beginning. But I always say, if you had somebody come in your house with a drill to drill a hole, you might be comfortable not knowing a huge amount about that company. But if you put that same person in a school, especially if there are children in it, it's a very different game. We have to do a lot more checks. We have to do a lot more understanding about what will be happening. So I make no apology for the quality that we put into the paperwork. It's all about providing the best service we can. But with that said, we're always open to improvement, but that's part of this work is to break down things to an easiest level to suppliers, and so we'll be working with all the major employers. So training, I think, is something I want to expand on, and the focus there is with education, just to make sure that messaging is out there. And Councillor Jones's point about allowing a space for people to raise issues through the schools to raise issues, I think is a great one, and we'll certainly table that. I think that's what it's all about fundamentally, is to make that bridge between what you could say is the corporate setup, the council and the schools, and allow a space for that dialogue. Other things we're keen on doing is as we've discussed, in the general swathe of technological improvement. We took on a contract that meant we didn't have to print our contracts anymore. It's sort of a heavily legally verified sign-off service, because we obviously deal with millions of pounds, and you need proper enforceable contracts through that process. But in just that piece of software alone, it saved 23,000 pages of print in 1 year. Thankfully, we did it just before the pandemic came in, so that has been a real lifesaver as well. That. So there's the expansion of technology is a key issue, but fundamentally we are working on an all-whale basis for that. The next point is links to, I think, a lot of the discussions that have come up around working with suppliers, around enhancing environmental criteria. There is a lot we can do. I think I explained previously, if you want to, make your specification a green vehicle, we can do that. There's no barrier to doing that at the moment. If you want to, as we discussed in a previous meeting, design a contract where, let's say, there's lots of job lots up to £75,000 worth of work, which would help out local builders or electrical contractors, we can do that. We've done both of these things. That's how we do it. There is, however, in under 13.5, I think I mentioned the United Kingdom public contract regulations, which were previously dependent on the European Union's rules, are now no longer anchored to that piece of legislation. So the UK government is reviewing them, and one of the major things they want to do is exactly the type of things that the panel has been mentioning around being more flexible with their criteria. And social value is a key part of that. The Welsh government has said it is going to follow the new UK rules. So any minute, literally in the next few months, and we should see the first draft of those new rules. We haven't seen the rules yet. We've seen their intent, their strategic stroke policy intent, but it'd be nice to see the actual rules and what they mean for this agenda. So again, that's not only a Welsh agenda, it's a United Kingdom agenda, and that's happening right now. For improvement there. And then fundamentally, to finish off, we do a substantial amount of work. Hopefully that's been apparent in the various submissions by the other directorates and in this one, in terms of our supportive role in the central services, whether it's for social care, whether it's for the city centre regeneration. There's a lot of things going on in Swansea. And that's fundamentally the role of the directorate, is to support that work, make sure it's done to a high quality, and make sure it benefits all the residents of Swansea. So if that's okay, Mr. Holly, I'll finish there.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Adam, you've got your hand up. Adam, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. I was just trying to get it off mute then. I think I've got some gremlins in my machine this morning. So hopefully you caught everything that I said on the EU. I think my machine froze. It was just to go on a little bit further on Chris's final comment there in terms of the work that's undertaken by the team. I think it's just worth noting that there's only 8.5 members within the commercial procurement team that supports place, social services, education, and the corporate centre resources. And you've heard the amount of work that's undertaken, and there's circa 450 odd million pounds that this authority spends, most of which will at some point go through Chris's team in that way. So I think it's just worth recognising that you've had at least 4 officers, probably more from across those. That's half of Chris's team already, if it was reciprocal in terms of when place attended, when education attended, and so on. And Chris has only got that 8.5. There is some guidance out there that talks about 1 member of staff per 10 million pounds worth of spend. I don't buy that myself, but even if that was 20 million or 30 million, you can already see the amount there is. And if we get this wrong, it could be an even greater cost. So I just think, for me, it's a thanks to Chris and his team for the real hard work they do. And hopefully you've heard that through the other sessions also in terms of the amount of work that's undertaken. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Adam. I got Councillor David Hopkins and then Councillor Peter Jones. David?
Yeah, I just like to put on record my thanks, particularly to Chris for all the hard work he does. He is a very small team, but they're very professional. They do, as you can see, a lot of work behind the scenes to get us where we are. If I could just expand on the local issue, right? It is still my ambition to hold that meeting with local suppliers to try to get more and more done locally. Yes, we do quite a lot at the moment locally, but there's always room for improvement. And politically, I can assure you that is my ambition to do more and more wherever we can to ensure that spend is within Swansea. Even when we are working with some of the big contractors, we ensure that we try to make sure the spend stays within Swansea when we do the big procurement issues. So even if we are working with, and I use the arena for an example, then obviously out of that arena, lots of that spend is still acting locally. So I can assure you that we will, and Chris knows I'm constantly on about this, right? I want to sit down with the local businesses to ensure to upskill them, to make them in a position where they can work with us and not work for the big contractors and then be subcontracted through. So I think we can do a lot more going forward. I think with the changes in procurement law, particularly from the EU, I think we're in a better place to do that as well. So just to thank, I really do, and I repeat it again, thanks, Chris, to your very small team for the work you do.
Thank you, David. Councillor Peter Jones.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The point I wanted to make is with reference to paragraph 6.4 in the paper, excellent paper, by the way. And this was a reference to areas of council policy or strategy that suppliers are expected to comply with. And that's obviously very important. For example, modern slavery, which is the first in a list of 4. My concern is there's no mention of the environment, no mention of our climate change commitment. And I would like some comment, please, as to whether, in fact, natural environment and climate change should be added to that list, whereby we expect potential suppliers to comply with council policy and priority. Thank you.
Okay. Adam, do you want to take first, or do you want Chris?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to come in. I think that the lists that we've put in are not in entirety. You're absolutely right, Peter. So definitely they should be on there, and we do, as an authority, that we've identified as a climate emergency, and the Environmental Act is we would adhere to. They should be there. Probably a mission of mine in them not being there in terms of the report, but very much are embedded in what we do and what we look at as part of any procurement exercise. So I can give you that assurance that we do consider them. My mission in terms of that report being finalised. So my apologies for that, but yeah, very much taken into consideration.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members who have any questions? No? Adam, Chris and David, can I thank you very much for coming to this morning's meeting. I know it was quite long, but at the end of the day, we are discussing two of the very big departments within the council, and I think it's very important that members understand where we come from. There will be a number of questions. I think one of the things that would be interesting, Chris, is if the UK public contract regs do come out before Christmas or anytime, if we could have a look at them, because I think it would be very important for us to understand in procurement terms of what these regs are going to say. I think there's a few other things as well. You know, I know we use e-cards now, and I know there's in the contractual in the terms of references, there are lots of indications about how much money people can spend and what have you. And I think at some stage we will be looking at that as well. But in the meantime, Chris, thank you very much. Adam, thank you very much. And David, thank you.
Cheers. Bye.
Thank you, Chair.
Michelle, is there anything you want off the members?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
I think we'll have to have a discussion about what we've heard today, where we want to go on the next. Like, what is the next one? I can't remember what.
Yeah, Councillor Holly. The next meeting is on the 20th of October, and that's going to be more of an external perspective. And we've contacted a number of external contractors to come along, so you can have discussion with them about the issues. Once we've had that, we'll have another We've got another meeting with Business Wales in early November, and there'll be a sort of mop-up exercise of some of the things that you might want to look at. You know, some of the other stuff would be like some of the data that's provided on procurement. Any sort of survey information, and also the research document that I sent around to everybody.
Okay.
And then after that, I'll bring all your evidence back to you for a meeting towards the end of November, so that you can have a look at everything that you've received and look back at your terms of reference and the key points and how you want to progress from there. So presumably from that point, we can start writing your final report and draw together your conclusions and recommendations. Unfortunately, this year we're quite tight on time, given that that it's the end of the sort of council term. So we need to get your report to Cabinet prior to that. So we need to get your report to written through the political processes and to Cabinet by mid-April. So we need to finish the evidence gathering by the end of November, really, to be able to do that.
Is everybody happy with that? Well, it'll have to be anyway, because we got to do it.
Yes, thank you.
You know, we haven't got no option, but we have to do it. So with that, thank you very much for your forbearance this morning. It has been quite a long meeting and quite complicated in as much as the education procurement, as you can imagine, is a huge issue, and one I'm sure we'll have comments to make about. Well, thank you again all very much, and look forward to seeing you soon. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you. Shall I stay on a minute?
Yeah.
I'll just turn off the recording now.